In case you don't know, I'm a rookie cop in a small, rural Pennsylvanian town, currently stuck working the night shift. I work your normal patrol shift, driving around pulling traffic, responding to your usual domestic disputes, and whatever other wonderful calls dispatch sends my way. There is not much to do here, so teenagers tend to get creative with how they spend their weekends. This town is filled with old farmhouses that are rumored to be haunted, so we tend to get a lot of calls for teens trespassing in abandoned houses. Every year around Halloween, these calls dramatically increase. I guess the local corn maze and pumpkin patches just aren't satisfying the need for a good scare for most of these kids. There's one place in particular that we have to keep a close eye on. Glitter's Farm has become somewhat of an urban legend around this town. I remember hearing stories in middle school about the farm, and by the time I reached high school, I used to overhear my classmates planning to go to Glitter's Farm in the middle of the night to see if the stories were true. The urban legend is that there are 8 children living on the Glitter Farm back in the 1930s. The temperatures were much cooler back then, dropping into the low 30s at night as early as October. The entire second floor of the home consisted of one room, which was where all of the Glitter children slept. Their body heat alone helped keep the temperatures high, but on nights it was below freezing, Mr. Glitter would throw some wood in the fireplace to heat up the home. On one particular cold October night, Mr. Glitter lit a fire before his family went to sleep. Nobody knows how or why, but the entire house caught on fire. Mr. Glitter woke up to the sound of his screaming children. He woke his wife up and they couldn't escape through their bedroom door. The fire had trapped them inside. They were able to get out through a window and tried everything they could to get to their children, but it was too late. They lost all 8 children in the fire. Over the years, Mrs. Glitter was so stricken with the grief that she eventually took her own life by hanging herself by a belt in their closet. Mr. Glitter continued to live alone and eventually died at the young age of 45 due to natural causes. Some people speculate he died of a broken heart, nearly 10 years after his wife's death, but the official story says that he died of a heart attack. The original Glitter Farm is nothing more than a burnt foundation in the middle of an overgrown field. The land has been bought and sold by many different farmers over the years to use for livestock. Story goes, if you drive to where the original farmhouse once stood and light a fire, then the ghost of the children will rush to put out the fire. As I'm sure you can imagine, this can be a big problem with teenagers testing the old urban legend. The other night I was working and got the first call of the season. Dispatch to 1034. 1034, go ahead. Can you respond to the old Glitter's Farm for some teenagers trespassing? A neighbor just called and said she saw a car drive down the lane onto the farm. 10-4. I finished my late night snack of some almonds and headed towards the old farm. I turned down the gravel lane and shined my spotlight in the direction of where the original farmhouse once stood. I wasn't surprised when I found a car sitting there, idling. I pulled up behind the car and parked my cruiser. I walked up to the car and was surprised to see no one inside. Keys were left in the ignition and the car was still running. I could smell smoke filling my nostrils, as if there was a fire directly behind me. I turned around and shined my flashlight in every direction. I couldn't see any fire, but the smell was nauseating. I covered my mouth and nose, and I continued to search for these pesky teenagers. I made my way towards the wood, and the smell of the smoke slowly dissipated as the closer and closer I got to the woods. I still couldn't see anyone as I stood still and shined my light in every direction. I yelled, "Police! Is anyone here? You aren't in any trouble. I just need to ask you to leave." No response. I was thankful for the moonlight to help guide my search. I could hear the owls and the crickets the deeper I wandered into the woods. I still couldn't find anyone in sight, so I decided to turn around and head back to my cruiser. As I started my way back to the cruiser, that's when I heard it. I heard a shrill scream that made every hair on the back of my neck stand up, and immediately started my adrenaline rush. I ran towards the sound of the scream. It sounded like it came from the direction of my cruiser. My gear and my duty belt jumped up and down as I ran. I finally made it back and looked into the parked car in front of my cruiser. I bent over and shined my flashlight inside. No one was in the car. I was still looking inside when I heard another shrill scream. This time it sounded like it was directly behind me, and I was overwhelmed with the smell of smoke again. I turned around and found two girls laying on the ground about 50 yards away. They were in the far left corner of the burnt foundation from the original Glitter farmhouse. I sprinted towards them and found the girls unconscious, while the other laid on the ground with her eyes wide open staring at the sky. I got down on my knees and checked the vitals of the unconscious female. I felt no pulse. I checked on the other female who was staring at the sky, and I assured her help was on the way. I didn't know what drugs these girls took, but they needed help. I got on my radio. 1034 to dispatch. Dispatch, go ahead. I'm going to need an ambulance to my location for possible overdose. I have one female who is conscious but unresponsive and another female who has no pulse. Show me starting compressions. Dispatch to 1034. Received. We show you starting compressions at 03:10 hours. I straddled the female and pressed down on her chest as I was taught in my training. I could feel her cartilage. I straddled the female and pressed down on her chest. I was taught in my training. I could feel her cartilage snap from her ribs on my first compression. It was a feeling I will never forget. I continued compressions for approximately 3 minutes, by which time my arms felt as though they were going to fall out of their sockets. The ambulance arrived on scene and loaded up both females. I went into work the next night and found that despite my efforts, the one girl didn't make it. I tried so fucking hard. An autopsy report was conducted and found that her lungs were filled with smoke and not a single drug was in her system. I called the medical examiner's office and spoke to one of the investigators working the night shift. Hey, it's Officer Barkley. Can you explain to me what happened with the autopsy for the girl you got last night? Oh, hey, yeah, I wasn't the one who handled it, but I read the report and talked to some people. That girl's lungs were so burnt and filled with smoke, it was as if you took her body right out of a fire. It didn't make any sense. There was no fire. When I first arrived on scene, those two girls were nowhere in sight. Where were they? What the fuck happened last night?